The skiff had been falling toward Tarekh-Hold for an hour before anyone answered the hail, and when they answered, it was not to say welcome, it was to say stop. Hari stopped. He held the skiff at the cluster's edge with the cold box strapped into the co-pilot's cradle beside him, its diagnostic strip steady pale green in the dark. And he looked at the fleet cluster he had crossed a year and most of a sector to reach, and he understood, before a single word of Vask grammar reached him, that he was too late by some amount he did not yet know how to measure. He had rehearsed the arrival for a year, not the words. The words were dakos, learned by rote off a dying Vask's mouth in a lamplit keel, and carried like the cold itself, a thing he held and did not understand. He had rehearsed the handing off, the setting down. The moment a burden he had never been meant to keep would pass out of his hands into the hands that were meant for it, and he would be a man again instead of a custody chain. He had not rehearsed this. The year had been a long one. He had flown the continuance out past the edge of the charts he trusted, refueling on vast sufferance at clusters that read him at the lock and admitted him only because the cold box made them, sleeping in the cockpit with the green strip glowing 2 feet from his face like a small accusation. He had learned to fly the route Dako tied into the cord, wide of the kept place, the silence the grammar bent around, without understanding any part of why. He had not told the Reach where he was going. He had not told Erie. He had told no one, because there was no one to tell who would not have a reason to want the thing he carried, and the only people who had a right to it were the ones falling toward him now out of the dark, smaller than they should be. The voice on the hail spoke compact standard, with a rough subsonic edge under it that the translator never quite smoothed. A Vask voice, weighted, unhurried even now.
You carry a thing that is cold. We read it from here. Hold at the edge, salvager, and say why you have brought it to us.
So they could read the cold box's signature across vacuum. That tracked. A people who carried their unborn in stasis-class units would know the shape of one falling toward them better than any customs wand.
My name's Hari Rao. I'm carrying a continuance. It was bound for Tarekh-Hold, for you, a long time back, and the carrying came to me. I'm here to give it to the people who agreed to take it.
The silence on the channel was long enough that he checked the link twice. Tarekh-Hold this close was a wound. He had seen Hold a year ago, chained keels in the lee of a debris field, marked like skin, lit from within, cold and crowded and alive. This was the same kind of place with half of it cut away. Whole keels were simply absent, flown off to other clusters or scrapped for the carrying of them, leaving dark sockets of bare cabling where habitats used to hang. The hulls that remained were marked the way Vask hulls were always marked, generations scribed into the plating. But the marks at the cut edges stopped mid-glyph, sheared off with the keels that had carried the rest of the sentence. A people reading their own history off their own walls, and the walls were missing pages.
Bound for Tarekh-Hold, the voice said at last. You will mean Coral. Coral of Tarekh agreed to receive a line, a long time back as you say, from a hold that was dying further out.
That's the one. Can you take me to Coral?
No, Coral is dead. Coral has been dead the better part of a year.
Hari sat with that. The pale green strip on the cold box did not flicker. It never flickered. It had not flickered in a year of his life, holding a temperature against a warm universe, holding a people's whole tomorrow in a thumb of glass. The person who had promised to catch it was a year in the ground, or wherever the Vask put their dead when they had a keel to put them in. They let him aboard. That was its own surprise. He had half expected to be turned at the edge, and he understood later that they let him in not as a kindness, but because a cold thing read at the edge of a grieving. Hold is a thing they have to know about, the way you have to know about a fire even when you have no water. The one who met him at the lock was the voice from the hail. She was a fleet Vask past middle life, the umber pelt going gray at the muzzle but not yet at the yoke, kin marks dense and dark across her temple and the backs of both hands. More than Sarn had carried at Tarekh-Hold. Fewer than Dako's life-deep accumulation. She wore a long knotted cord across her chest, bandolier-wise the same as Sarn's reading cord, but heavier, more knots, older. Her name was Vesh, and she was, she told him, the keel-mother of Tarekh-Hold, the one who held the cluster together now that the seniors who had held it were dying faster than the cluster could mark them. She took him to a marked alcove off the receiving lock, sat him on worn webbing, and made him say all of it. The wreck in cold storage, the 6 dead crew. The year the vial had spent in a reach-cold lockup, and then in an off-ledger box that read to human inventory as a licensed component. Tarekh-Hold. Sarn the keel warden. Dako dying, reading the coordinate square and naming this hold. Dako spending the last of his standing to tie the knot the grammar lacked, making Hari, a human, a kin other, no hold at all, the lawful carrier across a chain that had broken when the cold storage crew died. Vesh listened the way Sarn had listened, the way Dako had. Short clauses, long silences, no small talk. When he finished, she was quiet a while.
You did a hard and a strange thing, salvager, and a Vask of standing made it lawful. I read no fault in your carrying. Your hand is not broken.
But
the hand that was to take it is broken. Corel agreed to receive the line. Corel is dead, and Corel's standing died with Corel. A continuance is received by a hold through a Vask of standing who answers for the hold, and the one who answered is gone. A receiving is not a place catching a thing thrown. It is one hand taking from another hand. You bring me a carrying hand that is whole. You bring it to a hold whose receiving hand is in the ground.
She said it plainly and then waited the way they all waited.
then someone else answers for the hold. You're the keel-mother.
I hold the cluster together. I do not hold a continuance. A keel-mother keeps the living. A line that is received is bound to a hold to be carried forward when the hold can again. And a keel-mother who cannot promise her hold will be alive to carry it forward, cannot, by the form, agree to receive it. I will not lie to a dead people's tomorrow to make a salvager feel his year was not wasted.
That landed harder than she meant it to, maybe, or exactly as hard as she meant it to. With the Vask, he could never tell.
So, a continuance carried off its chain is broken. That's what Sarn told me at Tarekh-Hold. And now, the hold that's supposed to catch it is broken too.
2 broken ends, she said. By the form, salvager, you do not tie 2 broken ends. You mourn them. You carry the line nowhere, because there is nowhere hold left to carry it. And you grieve that a hold's tomorrow ended on the road.
He should have felt the floor go out from under him. He had crossed a sector for the setting down, and the setting down was a thing the grammar said could not happen. Instead, what he felt, sitting on the worn webbing in the cold-marked alcove with breath haze in front of his face, was the specific irritation of a man who has been told a job cannot be done by people who have not tried hard enough to do it. He had heard cannot be done before. He had heard it from a Sewell lean factor and a reach auditor and a keel warden who turned him away at the edge of a different cluster a year ago. In his professional experience, cannot be done was almost always a sentence with a clause missing off the end. It cannot be done the way it has always been done.
At Tarekh-Hold, he said slowly, the carrying chain was broken. The crew that should have carried it were dead, and a non-hold had it for a year, and the form said that was broken. Unreceivable. Couldn't be carried.
And yet it was carried. You said so. The form was bent.
It wasn't bent. It was routed. Dako couldn't fix the broken chain, so he ran it through a hand that wasn't broken, the kin-other bond. He couldn't make me a hold. He made me a link. He tied the knot the grammar didn't have on the carrying side, and a warden witnessed it. So, the cluster would hold it true.
Vesh went very still. He had learned with the Vask that stillness was not absence. It was the opposite of absence.
So you've got a broken hand on the receiving side. Corell's dead. The standing died with him. Fine. But the bond doesn't have to run through Corell. It ran through a kin-other once already, on my end. Why can't it run through one on yours? You don't need a hold whole enough to receive. You need one unbroken hand to take from mine. Somebody this cluster is willing to call a link, the way Tarekh-Hold called me one. A receiving through a kin-other instead of a carrying through one. Same knot. Other hand.
The silence after that was the longest yet.
You are telling a grieving hold, Vesh said, how to bury its own, with a thing a dead pilot from another cluster did once. You understand there is no Vask alive who has heard of a continuance received through a kin-other. The carrying now, once, at a Tarekh-Hold, by Dako's hand. The receiving, never. The grammar does not have the knot on that hand.
It didn't have the knot on my hand either, until Dako tied it.
She made a sound he couldn't read. It might have been disgust. It might have been the Vask equivalent of a tired man laughing in the dark.
Come, she said, and stood. Before you tell me what my hold can carry forward, you will see what my hold is. You will earn the right to be refused properly.
She walked him through Tarekh-Hold. He had not asked to see it and understood that he was not being shown it as a courtesy. He was being shown the arithmetic. The cluster had been 400 once. It was under 90 now. The numbers came out of her flat. The way Pell of two voices had once run a lean to 0. Except these were not units, these were people. And the dying was not a market event. It was just dying. A hold thins past a line and cannot crew its own keels. And keels uncrewed are cut free and given to clusters that can still fill them, because a keel is too dear a thing to let drift dark. Tarekh-Hold was giving itself away one hull at a time so its hulls would not die with it. The keel-mother's job, she said, was to decide the order. They passed a sealed keel where the marking lamps still burned low behind a cold hatch. The end-of-life keel, where the marks were red. It was not empty. It was, she said, never empty now. And in the navigation keel, where the cluster kept the inherited chord grammar that routed its carryings, she stopped him at a long, knotted reading board and made him take the cold storage square out of his jacket and lay it beside the board's own cord. He had carried the square a year. He had stopped seeing it the way you stop seeing your own hands. He laid it flat, the child's drawing transcribed in chord, the bright corner knots, the root Dako had read tied along its length, and the one tight central knot the rest of the pattern bent around, the kept place, the silence on the road. He had flown around it on the way here without asking why, the way Dako said the cord knew where the silences were and the Vask only obeyed. Vesh put one short-furred finger on the central knot and went still in a new way.
This mark is wrong, she said.
Wrong how? It's a kept place. You carry around it.
It is a kept place that has been marked again. There is a second turn worked into the knot. The grammar's way of saying, a kept place is not as it was when the rote was first tied. The carrying grammar can note when a kept place has changed. This one carries that note. It was not on this square when Coral agreed to receive the line. I read this route a year ago, when the agreement was made, to know if my hold could send a hand to meet the carriers. The mark was not here then.
Harry looked at the knot. It was a knot. He could no more read the difference than he could read the difference between two words in a language he had never heard spoken.
Somebody retied it. A carrier passing through, updating the route.
No carrier has flown that route in a year. No Vask hand tied this, The grammar marks a change in a kept place the way the chord marks a death. And no one in this cluster, salvager, no one I can ask, no one alive that I know to ask, can tell me what changed at a silence the Vask have carried around since before Tarekh-Hold had a name. We did not make the carrying, we only obey it. And now it has told us a thing, and there is no one left old enough to know what it means.
She let that sit. Then she folded the square, gently, the way you would fold something that belonged to a child, and handed it back.
You carry your line past a silence that has changed, and you did not know it. And now you do. And it changes nothing about what you came to do. I tell you only because you should not carry it ignorant. The carrying does not care what is kept. It only routes you around it.
It changed nothing. He filed it where he filed the other things he could not do anything about. Beside the dead zone center Yara had told him about over bad orbital whiskey, beside the silence the EU were said to keep, a list of doors he would never open and could not stop seeing. What he came to do was still in front of him. A people too broken to receive their own promise. A knot the grammar didn't have. Back in the navigation keel, he made his case the way he would have made it to a reach override board, which is to say plainly and with the cost named up front.
You said it costs. The carrying cost. Daco, the last of his standing. He spent it tying my knot, and he died at the reading of his marks. So I know what I'm asking. I'm asking somebody in this hold to spend the last of theirs the way Daco spent his. Not to receive it for the hold. You can't promise the hold lives. I heard you. To take it as a link. One unbroken hand. And then the line waits, cold, held by a kin other on your side, until this cluster or its keels or whoever carries Tarekh-Hold's name can carry it forward. The way it would have waited, in Coral's keeping. I'm not asking you to lie that you'll live. I'm asking you to keep a door open that you might not walk through.
And who, Vesh said, spends the last of their standing? You do not get to choose, salvager. You have never gotten to choose. You propose. A Vask of standing disposes. That is not a thing I let you forget.
No, he agreed. I never have. I just carry.
She did not answer him. She gathered the hold. It was not a crowd. Under 90 people, and not all of them came. The ones who came filed into the navigation keel slow and quiet, marked hides catching the marking lamps, and they ranged themselves along the marked walls and they waited, the way the Vask waited, while Vesh laid the whole strange thing out in their own tongue, and the translator gave Hari only the shape of it. A human, a carried line, a dead receiver, a knot that did not exist. Then an old one came forward. Older than Vesh. Old the way Daco had been old. Gray-threaded all through the umber, the yoke gone silver, kin marks so dense across temple and jaw, and the backs of both hands that they read as a single dark map of a long life. The old one was Coral's clusterkin, had stood beside Coral when Coral made the agreement, a year and a long flight ago, and had nothing left to spend but the standing of having been there. The old Vask looked at Hari for a long time, then at the cold box and the pale green strip.
This is Maro, Vesh said. Maro stood with Corel at the promising. Maro is dying, this season or the next. Maro has asked to be the hand.
Hari set the coal box down on the marked deck in the lamplight in front of the old Vask, and he opened the cradle the way Sarn had taught him a year ago. Slow, both hands, the makers kept cold, breathing out pale into the cold keel air. It was Vesh who tied the knot. The keel-mother could not receive a continuance, but she could witness a kin-other made, the way Sarn had witnessed Daco make one, so the cluster would hold it true. She named Maro kin-other to the line, not to a hold, to the carrying, the way Dako had named Hari, and Morrow, with the last of a dying standing, took the unbroken end of the bond Hari held and tied it to the broken one, and made the knot the grammar lacked on the receiving hand. Morrow's short-furred fingers closed around the cold glass.
"It's yours now," Hari said, and his voice did the thing it did, which was go quiet instead of breaking. "I carried it as far as I could carry it. You've got it."
The line is received, Vash said. To the keel. To the hold, to the marked walls that would carry the saying of it. Tarekh-Hold holds a tomorrow. Whatever else it cannot do.
He stayed for the marking. Vesh set a kin mark into the back of his hand with a borrowed iron. Not Morrow's. Morrow had no iron to spare, but a keel-mother's, a thing he understood was not done for strangers, and was being done for him anyway. It hurt the way she had promised it would. He did not flinch, which she seemed to expect, and which seemed to cost him something in her regard that he was glad to pay.
You came to set a thing down, she said over the iron, and you will leave carrying more than you brought. That is the way of it. A man who has carried for one hold and made a road for another is not a stranger to the keels anymore. There will be holds that bless your name, and holds that fear it, and both of them will know it. You did not ask for that. You do not get to refuse it either.
He looked at the fresh mark cooling on the back of his hand, beside the older scars that had never meant anything but work.
"Yeah," he said. "I'm getting used to not getting to choose."
A continuance received was a hold's hold tomorrow caught before it hit the ground. He had crossed a sector carrying a thing he could not read, given to him by a man who died doing it, for a people who had every reason to refuse him, and a grammar that said they must. And the line was in Vask hands now, cold and held in theirs, waiting for a hold to be alive enough to carry it forward. It was not a problem solved. Tarekh-Hold was still dying. Morrow was still dying. The future was still gritty and most of the doors were still shut. But a thing that had been falling for a year had been caught. That was a clean win. He could not remember the last one. Harry was strapping the empty cradle back into the co-pilot seat. Lighter, the green strip dark now, just a box, when Morrow came to the lock. The old Vask carried something cold. Hari knew the shape of it before he saw the strip. A Stasis-class unit, smaller than his, scuffed and old, its diagnostic glow steady pale green in the dark. Tarekh-Hold's own line, it would turn out, thinned now to the same single thumb of glass. A hold that caught her tomorrow today, and whose own tomorrow had just gone thin enough to need carrying someday on. Morrow did not give it to him. Morrow set it down on the deck near Hari's hand in the lamplight and let it sit there. Let him see it sit there. The two of them looked at it. Then the old Vask took it up again and carried it back inside, and the lock closed and the cluster fell away behind the skiff into the dark. And Hari flew home with his hand throbbing and his cradle empty, and the certain knowledge settling into him the way the cold settled into glass, that the carrying does not end. It only ever passes on,